I'm Kay.
And I'm Max.
And you're watching The Watch List.
In 1920, a children's story, the story of Dr. Dolittle, being the history of his peculiar life at home and astonishing adventures in foreign parts, was published by Hugh Lofting. In 1967, 20th Century Fox adapted Lofting's children's series into a musical starring Rex Harrison. The musical suffered from behind-the-scenes drama, which include going over budget by millions of dollars, a revolving door of creatives who signed on to the film and were then either fired or replaced, and falling 39 days behind the original production schedule due to ballooning production costs and reshoots. Of course, with so much chaos surrounding production, it wasn't a huge surprise when the film failed to make its budget back at the box office. Its final box office total coming in at $9 million against a $17 million budget. And not only was the film a box office bomb, it was also critically panned with reviews like this one from Time magazine. Somehow, with the frequent but no means infallible exception of Walt Disney, Hollywood has never learned what so many children's book writers have known all along. Size and a big budget are no substitutes for originality and charm.
However, despite the fact that the 1967 adaptation of Dolittle nearly bankrupted the studio, in 1998, 20th Century Fox had the audacity to try again with another Dolittle feature starring Eddie Murphy. Unlike its predecessor, this version of Dolittle took virtually nothing from the book series, besides the title character's name and the idea of a doctor who had the ability to talk to animals. While the 1998 version received mixed reviews from critics, it was also a box office success, earning $294 million against a budget of $70 million. There also seemed to be zero behind-the-scenes drama, and the film soundtrack went on to hit number 4 on the Billboard 200 charts, with one of its singles, Are You That Somebody, by Aaliyah, going on to receive a Grammy nomination for Best Female R&B Performance.
In March of 2017, Universal Pictures won a bidding war for the rights to adapt Dolittle with Robert Downey Jr. starring as the lead. The film was originally slated to come out in May 2019. However, in April 2019, it was reported that the film had undergone 21 days of reshoots following poor test screening. Besides the poor feedback from the audience, there was also the matter of a little indie movie also slated for release in May 2019, a film that Universal Pictures was concerned about going up against for some reason. All of this led to the film's release date being pushed back even further, eventually not being released to theaters until January 2020. By this time, the film had not only undergone a title change from the Voyage of Doctor Dolittle to simply Dolittle, but it had also run into behind-the-scenes drama, which included spending way too much money on expensive reshoots, a revolving door of creatives who signed on to the film and were then either fired or replaced, and falling 240 days behind the original production schedule due to ballooning production costs and reshoots. Why does that sound so familiar?
That's what I like to call Dolittle deja vu.
More like Eddie Murphy's Revenge.
However, even with all the chaos behind the scenes, Universal Pictures eventually released Dolittle to raving reviews and box office success, cementing the legacy of Dolittle adaptations as totally worthwhile and totally worth a... Wait, no. Everyone hates it? Well, maybe hate is a strong word, but judging by its current status as a box office bomb and its 15% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, it's starting to feel like nobody's really a fan of Robert Downey Jr. talking to animals, or animals talking to Robert Downey Jr. Or maybe we just weren't ready for an adaptation of Dolittle that didn't also star Raven-Symoné.
And just like its 1967 predecessor, Dolittle was hit with scathing review after scathing review of its own. Here's one of them. Dolittle is not a film. Dolittle is a crime scene in need of forensic analysis. Something happened here. Something terrible, something inexplicable. Watching the film doesn't tell the whole story because it doesn't behave like the usual errant vision, which might be chalked up to a poor conceit or some hiccups in execution. This one has been stabbed multiple times, and only a thorough behind-the-scenes examination could sort out whose fingerprints are on what hilts.
Nice. Let's find out who stabbed Dolittle.
I suspect foul play.
Dolittle opens with a beautiful animation sequence narrated by Polly, a macaw who's also Dolittle's best friend. In said animation sequence, we learn that Dolittle had a wife who he loved, they were together a bunch, And then she died, and Dolittle turned into a recluse.
After Dolittle's wife dies, we're introduced to Tommy Stubbins. Is he an audience insert? Is he a Luke Skywalker type apprentice? He's both. He's neither. He's Tommy Stubbins. The movie doesn't really establish this, so we won't try to either.
Wait a minute.
After Tommy accidentally shoots a squirrel named Kevin, who's the second most annoying character in this film, he brings him to Dolittle for help. At the same time, Lady Rose, a maid of honor to the Queen, is also off to beat Dolittle. Turns out the Queen of England is dying and wants Dolittle to cure her so she doesn't, die.
So, when I first saw this movie, I thought Lady Rose was the Queen's daughter the whole time. I don't know who told me that, but it's what I thought, and finding out it wasn't the case didn't fundamentally change how I understood the movie, which is part of the problem with Dolittle. It goes out of its way to introduce a myriad of characters without doing the work of explaining who they even are. Characters like Mr. Robot as a gorilla, Polar Bear Bro John Cena.
Are you sure about that?
Oscar winner Octavia Spencer as a duck, Tom Holland dog Far From Home, and He Who Shall Not Be Named the tiger. It's almost like the movie is trying to replace character development with stunt casting, which doesn't work because it's a bad idea. Look, trying to replace characterization with stunt casting is like telling people that you're giving out free salad for lunch, but instead you bring everyone pizza. Sure, you might think everyone's going to have fun with the pizza, but you're wrong. We wanted the salad. We needed something with nutritional value. And now, all we have is a greasy, sloppy mess with zero substance. Anyway, back to the murder.
At first, in a true violation of the Hippocratic Oath, Dolittle turns down Lady Rose's request to help the Queen because he's no longer interested in helping humans. But after Lady Rose explains that if the Queen dies, then Dolittle loses his home, where he keeps the animals, Dolittle decides that it's time to get back in the Doctor game so he doesn't lose the Doctor deed. Dolittle soon arrives at the Queen's castle, where he finds out that she's been poisoned by Nightshade and can only be cured by a magical fruit from a land far, far away. Around this time, the squirrel that Stubbins brought to Dolittle is back in action and begins to plot his revenge on Stubbins for injuring him by mistake. This squirrel was added in the reshoots, wasn't he? You guys went back to the lab, decided Dolittle still wasn't funny after the first billion reshoots, and you called up Craig Robinson. And then you saddled him with a character you wrote in about 5 seconds, who's part that squirrel from Ice Age, part Kevin Hart bunny from Secret Life of Pets, and part just unbelievably annoying. And then you said good enough and added it to the final cut. This squirrel interrupts the movie 10 times and ruins every scene he's added to. I don't know what Dolittle was supposed to be, but I know adding a squirrel who has Vietnam-like flashbacks on screen doesn't fit in with whatever austere, high fantasy adventure film you were trying to make. And I just do not see where the squirrel fits into this vision. I hate this squirrel. I hate what this squirrel stands for. I think this squirrel is symbolic of the death of creative freedom in Hollywood. The last gasp of a dying auteur movement. This squirrel and its tiny paw have finally crushed the windpipe of directorial control.
Moving on from the death of Hollywood, after Dolittle finds out what he needs to save the Queen's life, we then meet the villain's main antagonist, Dr. Blair Moodfly, played by Michael Sheen. Moodfly is one of Dolittle's old schoolmates and a heated rival. He's also just incredibly boring. Moodfly isn't really given a lot to do in this movie, and spends the majority of his time alternating between being envious of Dolittle's abilities and being the butt of a bunch of unfunny jokes. Besides that, he's just kind of there, and he's evil because of the mustache. And in a children's movie, if you have any kind of facial hair, you're the devil, and that's just how it goes. Anyway, Moodfly decides that he wants to keep the magical fruit for himself, which means he can't let Dolittle get to that island far, far away, or else Dolittle wins again. So, Moodfly heads out on a voyage of his own.
After Stubbins, you remember Stubbins, finds out about Dolittle's quest for the Queen, he declares himself Dolittle's apprentice and decides to go on the mission too. But pretty much immediately, Dolittle tells him no, because why would Dolittle want to be responsible for a kid who's not related to him and can only end up being a liability? Stubbins then goes back home to his parents, all sad about not being on the ship. But don't worry, because Stubbins soon gets kidnapped by a giraffe we've never met before, a fox we've never met before, and Macaw we've met before, but mainly when she was giving exposition. The kidnappers then promise to get Stubbins to Doolittle's boat just in time to sail off for the voyage. After kidnapping a small child, the giraffe, the fox, and the macaw are chased through Stubbins' village as they try to get to the boat. At this point, the film thinks it's the perfect time to make jokes about the French Revolution, because the fox is in the scene, you see, and the fox is voiced by Marion Cotillard, you see, and the French Revolution was famously a laugh riot. And the kiddos are certainly going to get those jokes, and the parents won't feel like condescended by them at all. So, vive la resistance, I guess. I hate stunt casting.
Once Stubbins is on the boat, Doolittle sets sail for that island far, far away. Somewhere along their voyage, Stubbins realizes that he can talk to animals too, and practices conversing with the animals on board. Eventually, Doolittle notices Stubbins' attempts at talking to the animals, which you'd think would be a pretty huge deal because hey, this movie started off with Doolittle as a recluse who didn't want human connections. But now, look at this. Someone who shares the exact same powers as Doolittle? That's gotta be like his secret kid or something, right? His long-lost cousin? There just has to be some kind of undeniable human connection here. But there isn't. In fact, Doolittle seems totally chill about Stubbins talking to the animals, almost like he's watching Stubbins practice his Spanish on Duolingo. Why isn't Doolittle more surprised by this though? Is talking to animals as simple as learning a second language in this universe? And if that's the case, why is Moodfly so impressed and intimidated by Doolittle's abilities? Talking to animals is either magical or it's not Doolittle. And if it's not magical, why even center Doolittle as the main character? Why not shift focus to the kidnapped kid who's living his best life on this boat right now? I'd take a Stubbins movie any day of the week over a Doolittle who's doing so little.
As Doolittle et al. Continue on their voyage, Moodfly eventually catches up to their boat and starts to attack. To get away from Moodfly, Doolittle jumps into the ocean and harnesses a whale so the ship can be pulled to safety. And I actually really liked this scene. Harnessing a whale to pull a boat so it goes faster, it's straight out of a sci-fi, fantasy, steampunk, and I loved every second of it. Why couldn't Doolittle just have been more of this? Oh, also, Danny Elfman's score is great. The pacing really of this whole movie is great. Stubbins gets to actually do something and matter for 5 minutes of the movie, and Doolittle is in sicko mode the whole time. It's a really great scene. But then after this beautiful whale scene, we have this awful scene with Doolittle and Stubbins having a heart-to-heart on the boat. And I say it's awful, but it's really only awful because of the way it ends. During the conversation, Doolittle decides to be emotionally vulnerable and bring up his dead wife when talking to Stubbins, declaring her the greatest explorer he's ever known. Really get to see a different side of Doolittle, and it's all beautifully shot and wonderful and powerful. And then it's interrupted by monkeys. Monkeys slurping and chewing their way through Robert Downey Jr.'s moment of gravitas. He's talking about his dead wife, and so you just hear in the background, it's just awful. It is awful, because that's way funnier than listening to a guy talk about his dead wife, and therefore needs to be included. Because we all know children's movies that mention death even once are immediately in the dustbins of history. Yay, reshoots.
Anyway, after the Doolittle squad makes it to the island of somewhere, they enlist the help of James, the dragonfly,
the most annoying character in the film,
to help them steal Lily's journal. And James is fine. He's fine. He makes a joke about his dragonfly bone, and then he makes a joke about suicide. So this production paid people countless millions of dollars to come in and add those jokes to the script during the reshoots. Someone actually had to hear those jokes and still said, "Good job, guys. That's exactly what Doolittle was missing, a sex joke and a suicide joke." And then they all gave each other high fives and said, "I'll see you at the Oscars after party." Moving on, there's also a side joke here about how the ants on this island are all in the mafia. And it's funny because they do that thing where they quote The Godfather.
"You come to me for this on the day of my daughter's wedding."
And that's it. It literally means nothing to the plot. The Mafia ants never make another appearance in the movie, and whatever vague connection they had with James just fades into the Doolittle abyss. But let's get to the tiger.
So after Doolittle and James, the useless dragonfly, fail to retrieve Lily's journal, they get caught by Lily's dad, played by Oscar nominee Antonio Banderas. He's still pretty upset with Dolittle for marrying his daughter because he blames him for his daughter's eventual demise on one of their trips. This leads to America's dad Antonio Banderas throwing Dolittle into a tiger cage with Barry, played by Oscar nominee Ralph Fiennes. Moments before attacking Dolittle, Barry reveals that Dolittle actually abandoned him on the island. Before Dolittle left the island, he'd been working as Barry's psychologist, helping the tiger process his desperate need for his mother's approval. This makes Dolittle, a man whose moral compass we have no read on, a villain, doesn't it? And if you think any of that matters to the plot, no. Dolittle gets saved by Chi-Chi the gorilla, and even with 6 Oscar-nominated actors in the scene, the best they can do is a joke about the tiger getting hit in the nuts. And instead of Dolittle adding Barry to the animal crew or making amends for abandoning him to begin with, the movie just keeps going and never looks back. Just like Dolittle.
Anyway, while Dolittle is being saved from Barry, Tommy Stubbins successfully steals Lily's journal. Eventually, Dolittle and Tommy meet back up, but almost immediately after they're reunited, Moodfly snatches Lily's journal and destroys Dolittle's ship. After seeing Dolittle super sad about losing to Moodfly, Lily's father suddenly has a change of heart and decides to loan Dolittle a boat because he realizes that he loves Lily more than he hates Dolittle? Really? The same guy who was about to let Dolittle die like 5 seconds ago has this huge change of heart with no prior explanation? Why does he like Dolittle now? Does he just hate Moodfly more? Who cares? Not this movie, apparently.
So, after Dolittle gets his boat, he starts trailing Moodfly, and eventually they both end up at that same island, far, far away with all that sweet magical fruit. Dolittle and Moodfly then have a mini showdown inside a cave, which is just them politely insulting each other back and forth before a dragon shows up and starts eating the bad guys. And make no mistake, this dragon only eats the bad guys. It's like she can somehow tell who the main antagonist of the film is, almost like she's been watching along with the audience. Anyway, she eats all the evil people and knocks Moodfly into a hole, and then she starts to groan about how much pain she's in. Dolittle, being quick on his feet, figures out that the dragon has some kind of internal blockage, and he decides to perform a dragon enema. And this was it for me. This is when I lost my faith in everything I've ever believed in. Having to watch Robert Downey Jr. pull a bagpipe out of a dragon's butt and then pretend like a dragon was farting all over him, it finally broke me. Congratulations, Dolittle. You did it. You broke an honest man.
After helping out the dragon, she's super thankful and gives Dolittle the fruit he needs to heal the queen. You guys remember the queen. Anyway, Dolittle and the animal crew make it just in time to save the queen's life, and then everyone lives happily ever after. Oh, and the movie also reveals that one of the queen's chairmen is the one who wanted to poison her because he wanted to be the king himself. And he was also the one who sent Moodfly after Dolittle, so he'd fail to save the queen, but joke's on him because nobody stops the Dolittle. And that's it. The movie's over. Dolittle stops being a recluse and brings Tommy Stubbins in as his official apprentice, and everything's been resolved, and high fives all around. I'll see everybody at the Oscars after party.
So, who killed Dolittle? Was it the reshoots, the ballooning production costs, the unnecessary, unfunny jokes grafted onto the final product?
Yep. Yeah, that was it. We did it, guys. We solved it.
We are finished.
With your permission, I'd like to spin a little further.
Look, Dolittle isn't an awful concept, and I think that underneath all the confusing and sometimes just bad choices, there's a decent fantasy adventure film. But the reliance on cheap jokes, stunt casting, and a wealth of underdeveloped characters makes Dolittle just feel hollow, which is painfully ironic. Since Dolittle is supposed to be all about a guy who's nothing but heart, who commits himself to advocating for and protecting creatures who cannot advocate for themselves. But instead we get a muddled film with characters like Moodfly, an antagonist who never has any steam, an emotional climax that involves a dragon getting its colon cleansed. And I understand they were trying to make a point about the character of Dolittle. He doesn't slay dragons, he cures them. It could have gone anywhere else in the film and been a great moment of character development. Just not at the climax of your film. It's too weird for that. But you know what? Maybe centering Dolittle around a fart joke makes sense. Because despite all of Dolittle's allusions to having a heart at the center of the film, when you really pull it apart, it's nothing but hot air. Hot air and a concerning amount of Oscar winners and nominees.
Hey, Max?
Yeah?
Would you say that somehow with the frequent but by no means infallible exception of Walt Disney, Hollywood has never learned what so many children's book writers have known all along? Size and a big budget are no substitutes for originality and charm?
Yeah, I would. And not just by a little.
Hey guys, guys, thank you so much for watching the watch list.
If you like this video, please like and subscribe. You can also follow us on Twitter and support us on Patreon.
Okay, I have to go. I have to go watch The Good Dolittle, the one with Eddie Murphy.
Same. Did you know Jim Broadbent was in this? Was being nominated for an Oscar requirement for this movie? They really could have just cut the budget for this and made an animated Dolittle, honestly.
Yeah, I'd watch that.
Ta-da!